Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. In my work with ADHD women, and particularly ADHD women entrepreneurs, as well as through my own experience, I've noticed some unique challenges that those of us who masked through overfunctioning and high achievement, us hard worker, conscientious types that pushed and pushed and pushed and then maybe crashed at some point. I've noticed some unique challenges that we face when it comes to business and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship. There you go. And so today we're going to get to the bottom of what's happening and kind of why it's happening, as well as what we can do about it. So before we go much farther, I want to define or kind of share what I mean when I say overfunctioning and high achievement. So some of us somehow figured out and had the inner and outer resources. I know in a recent episode, we talked about people who were underachievers with ADHD, and that's a really hard journey. And for whatever reason, that's just how your brain was. Maybe the circumstances in your life didn't allow for you to do some of the things that I'm going to talk about with this group of ladies who share things that I did. So I just want to honor that if you were not someone who did this, this doesn't mean you were bad. It not at all. There's your own set of challenges that come with that, but if you weren't able to mask your ADHD or whatever, and maybe it's good you didn't have to, because then you didn't have identity struggles later. I don't know, maybe you did. But it wasn't always possible. It's not always possible for everyone. I see this especially with my complex trauma survivors that it was just hard. Sometimes they complex trauma survivors can really push and work really, really hard and overfunction. Also, it's not always possible. So I just want to name that before I dive into this. But some of us, for whatever reason, our little selves figured out that if we worked really, really hard and over functioned, we got better results in our environment, in school, the way people treated us socially, right? Somehow we noticed, like, okay, if I get good grades, then I'm less likely to get in trouble. Or, I mean, I noticed, I can say this for me. I don't know if this is anyone else. I'm a talker. You probably know that from listening to my podcast, but I'm a talker. And as a kid, even though I had really, really good grades because I worked my butt off doing my homework from the time I was born, my parents said I came out that way, being a hard worker, which isn't always great. It serves us for a while, but we'll get into that. I figured out subconsciously, of course, this wasn't like my 6-year-old self, like, ooh, this is a great way to do it. But I figured out that if I got good grades, if worked really hard on my homework, I got good grades, that then I didn't get in as much trouble when basically what I now know was ADHD came out. So usually the ways my ADHD came out is talking out of turn, blurting out in class, uh, interrupting, which I have a whole thing on what people call interrupting because neurotypical people talk differently than neurodivergent people. And so what we call being excited and passionate about conversation, neurotypical people call interrupting. So I just want to say that aside. But at any rate, I noticed I got in less trouble for those things than people who weren't doing as well in school. And so somewhere inside my little girl self was like, okay, we're going to work really, really hard and get really good grades. And then we'll stay out of trouble, which was really important because I went to Catholic school and being in trouble was not good. It was not good at all. It was scary sometimes. So I'm grateful that my younger self figured this out. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Something inside of you learned that if you worked really hard, and there were pockets where it maybe didn't show up, but if you worked really, really hard in school, for example, and then you got really good grades, so you were a high achiever, that maybe people didn't get on you quite as much about your ADHD, or you at least didn't get in as much trouble as those who were around you who seemed similar. We now know they probably had ADHD, but got in trouble. And in some ways, this is fantastic because you were able to find a way with ADHD that was possibly undiagnosed at the time, maybe diagnosed, but you found your way through it where you were able to probably get through college or some of us, a master's degree program. But there may have come a time when you fell apart, and that could be falling apart at home when you were a kid. So you'd push, push, and crash. It could be that you in your 20s, like me, went bigger than you'd gone before and ended up in a therapist's office, anxious and depressed, and no longer really knowing who you are because you did everything to not get in trouble with people for your ADHD, even if you didn't know it was ADHD. Those are some of the things that may have happened eventually when you eventually crashed. So none of this is bad. It's just part of it. And I'm not saying your ADHD never came out. If you, like I said, with talking, I was always talking. I don't think I ever stopped talking. So I was frequently reminded throughout classes to stop talking. And also, my bedroom growing up was a hot mess. Now, thankfully, my mom had the rule that unless company is coming over, because I had a main floor bedroom, so the coats would go on my bed. But unless company is coming over, I don't care what your room looks like. I just don't want your crap in the rest of the house. So shoes, backpack, those need to go in your room and jackets need to be hung up. So thankfully, I didn't get in trouble for my room being messy and I could just quote unquote messy, right? It was my ADHD organization at the time. But our ADHD still showed up, or maybe we lost stuff, or when we're stressed as kids, things would still happen. I remember when I was a senior in high school, I had my senior solo at my dance recital, and I was really, really nervous. And not once, but twice in that night, I locked my keys in my car, and my mom had to come and let me into my car. Well, their car. It was their car, but the one I was using. So your ADHD likely showed up, even if this was your way of coping. And you found a way to push and push, to work really hard, to overfunction so that you could be a high achiever or at least a decent achiever. So then you didn't get in as much trouble. And through that, you probably learned perfectionism and people pleasing and then any social stuff. I don't know about you, but I learned people pleasing so that I would get along in friendships and not be ostracized. What I didn't know is I was hanging out with a bunch of neurotypical people who didn't understand how I talked and thought I was being rude when I was just being ADHD. So, and didn't know it, of course, but so I learned to mask that too. And maybe you did. And here's the thing, whatever part of you figured this out helped you a really lot. It helped you get to where you are today. And it's important that we thank those younger parts of ourselves. Like, you know what? You did awesome. You did the best you know how to do at the time. You helped me be able to get my college degree or what it not like a college degree is everything, but you helped me get through cosmetology school. You helped me learn a trade. You whatever it is, you were able to accomplish some of the things you wanted to accomplish because this younger part of you figured out how to mask in a way that you could make your way through society a little less scathed, or even if you were scathed, at least less in trouble. And the problem is this no longer works once you own a business. When you're an entrepreneur, hard work, like working harder and harder and over functioning, isn't effective. I'm going to tell you why. That hustle, that hard work, that pushing, pushing, and pushing dysregulates your nervous system. And I think you know what I'm talking about. You are likely getting into your fight or flight response when you're hustling, followed by a shutdown response when you crash. And what does that feel like when I say fight or flight response? You might feel like you're wired or on edge or riled up and just this urgency, like you're running on a motor. And that is your fight or flight response trying to get you to do the stuff. And I get why. I get why parts of you are pushing and pushing because they learned that was effective. They learned that was a good way to be able to function, to be able to get stuff done. It's just that when you're an entrepreneur, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And when you're dysregulated, you do not have access. First of all, you don't have access to self energy like your highest self, right? That inner wise woman that we talk about. But also, neurobiologically speaking, you do not have access to things like creativity, the ability to problem solve creatively, creativity for your business, the work that you do, creativity for marketing, writing copy, writing emails, podcasting. When your nervous system is dysregulated, it's hard to really access that. And part of what makes it even harder is you don't have access to your highest self. You don't have access to your inner wise woman. And she's the one who knows. You're the one who knows deep down what needs to be said. But there needs to be enough space and enough silence for that inner voice to be heard. That doesn't happen when you're hustling and when you're working hard. I was working with someone on messaging at one point, and one of the examples he would use is giving, I can't remember what he called it now. But anyway, people often say that you need to work hard to be successful in business. And here's the thing. Working hard does not guarantee success. Pause for a moment and think about some of the hardest working people you know. Or maybe think about some of the hardest working people who live in like somewhere in Africa. They're working very, very hard, or India, or another country, maybe not India. India is not a good example, but another country where they're working very, very hard and they have very meager or limited access to things. They have very limited finances. And maybe in Africa, in certain villages, that's how things are, and that's okay. But hard work doesn't guarantee monetary success. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. If you look at some of the people who work on farms, I guarantee they are some of the hardest workers. And farmers, unless you're into factory farming, really, my understanding is they don't make a crap ton of money because there's so much dependent on how the weather is or how are their prices and how everyone else's yields are. And so hard work does not guarantee success. And that is true for you as well, even though in the past it may have. Because here's the thing with entrepreneurship, and especially if you have an online business, but even in general, you are marketing to people. You are selling something to people. And whether you are selling a product or a service, you are selling it to them. And people are unpredictable. What they want, when they want it, what kind of marketing or words they'll be responsive to is constantly in flux. So that you can work your butt off, you can push and hustle and never see any progress in your business. Because in order to get a sense of what people need and want and what they're willing to buy, the language they need to hear, you have to have access to your inner wise woman, to your highest self. That is the you that is tuned into the frequency of the universe. From that place, when you sit in silence, you will hear what they need to hear. But it cannot be done from a place of hustling and pushing and constant motion, the way that if you're like me, you did growing up. So that's one way that our old way of working hard isn't working anymore. But another way is when we were young, we got like, I don't know about you, but we got quarterly report cards, and there'd be like sometimes even a midterm report card. And our parents or teachers would tell us we were doing a good job if you were a high achiever type, right? Oh, you're doing so good. Oh, yeah. Or you'd raise your hand and answer questions in school, and you'd get all kinds of praise for it. Maybe even in college, right? If you went to college, you got good grades, you had that, and your teachers probably liked it when you knew the answers to questions. However, there becomes a time, especially once you get into business, where you don't get that. Even at a job, you might have, like in a job, you might have a supportive boss who, first of all, you have performance reviews every year or so, but then also you might have a job. You might have a boss who's really good at being like, "Hey, you know what? I like how you did that. Way to go." Right? Which is awesome. I'm glad if you had that. And there isn't any of that in your business. The only positive feedback you get is when something works. When someone likes your social media post, when people listen to your podcast or share or comment on it, which by the way, love it when you do that. When people buy things from you, that's the only positive feedback you get. But it can take a while, and I don't wanna put that limiting belief in. It can take some time to get your messaging right, to figure out what your audience needs and wants. That can take a while. So, in the meantime, you're getting all kinds of feedback about what's not working, and that isn't bad. That's normal. When you own a business, especially if you're getting started in a new market or you're doing digital entrepreneurship like I do with this business, there's a lot of learning to be done, both in general, like how to do it, but also how do you reach your people? Who are your people? What do they actually want that they're willing to pay for? That takes time. And what it takes to figure that out is what some people might call failure or mistakes. What I would call it is experimentation and lesson learning, right? It's testing. You're trying different things out to see, like, oh, does this resonate? Does this resonate? Oh, that didn't work. Ooh, that didn't work. But your younger self is going, "Oh my god, we're getting in trouble. We're getting in trouble. Oh my gosh, we didn't get an A." Well, there's no more A's in entrepreneurship. The A can be seriously the A for effort, right? It's actually part of the problem if you've ever read Carol Dweck's book Mindset. She talks about the growth versus fixed mindset, and the fixed mindset is believing you have it or you don't. So mistakes are signs that you don't have it and that you're a failure. Whereas the growth mindset is seeing mistakes and things that don't go as planned is how that's my definition of mistake as learning opportunities. And grades, unfortunately, they kind of tell you if you have it or you don't, or at least the way we're taught to think about grades. Instead of thinking about grades as being like, okay, this is just letting you know where you're at right now and there's room for improvement because grades are at the end. Grades are at the end of a quarter or a semester. Sometimes you'll get a midterm grade and that'll give you some feedback, but mostly it's like, yep, here's the judgment. And it can be good or it can be bad, but either way, it attaches you to that external feedback. And when you're an entrepreneur, you cannot be attached to external feedback. Or you either will not be able to put yourself out there in the first place, or you will, but you'll kind of be small. You'll not really say what needs to be said, or just kind of dabble in putting yourself out there. Or You'll you will be able to put yourself out there, and then when you get negative feedback of some kind, like no one responds to it, no one signs up, no one likes it, you get haters, then you might crumble. And really, it's this younger part of you who's like, "Oh my god, people hate me, I'm doing a bad job." And the reality is feedback about your business is not positive or negative, it's just information. But there's parts of you that are really stressing out about what it means because these younger parts of you who over functioned and were high achievers as a way to mask ADHD and stay out of trouble, they can't handle this. They don't know what to do. And so there's some work to do there. There's some healing to do there. In the meantime, what I recommend you do is find a way to let go of the hustle. Find a way to get grounded. Find a way to get aligned with your highest purpose, your vision, why you're doing this, and to regulate your nervous system. And that when you notice you're dysregulated, instead of pushing and pushing, taking a moment to pause and get regulated. So that's what I've got today. I hope this was as helpful as it was fun to share about. And I would love it if you like and share the Self Love Woman Way podcast, and make sure you tune in next week. Take care.